Okay, we are live. That's the wrong button. Okay, every time. Hey, we're here. Hi, welcome to Adventures to Order again. I'm Paolo. We are this week going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be working on spells. We're going to try and homebrew some spells. We've forgotten the music today because hello there. We've forgotten the music today because we had some trouble last time dropping frames. Hopefully this time we won't. So it's a shame, but I encourage you to listen to your own music at home if you've got any. We're drinking from an appropriate receptacle today. But yeah, we're going to focus on some spells. We're going to be trying to make some homebrew 5th edition spells, and we're also going to kind of discuss magic systems in games, kind of esoterically and separate from 5th edition, and try to maybe come up with our own system if we have the time or the creative inclination. But straight away we will just have a quick look at the Player's Handbook that we've got up here. Player's Handbook's always a great resource. Now, if you're intending to homebrew some spells, I encourage you to talk to your players about what they want, rather than trying to come up with something cool and new for your world. Because generally speaking, at least mechanically so, in 5th edition, a lot of that ain't broke and it don't need much fixing. Fireball's a fireball, a lightning bolt's a lightning bolt. Fly is fly, and polymorph is polymorph. And those are, a lot of times players will want to mess with that in its own right in the space of the game. What homebrewing spells really, at least in a 5th edition sense, is for is when there's something lacking there. There's something your player wants to do that isn't just covered by reflavouring something else. It's been popularly done in a lot of ways. Critical Role has had a few hits there, like Liam O'Brien's spells. Like he rethemes a lot of stuff, like a cat-based stuff. He changed Bigby's hand to a cat claw essentially, and just swapped out bludgeoning for slashing damage. But he also created something that was just a bit of a different fire spell that could get multiple targets, which wasn't too much of a stretch for the imagination. But that's the kind of thing we're going to focus on, is more like rationalising how many D12 damage it does at what level. And that's easy enough to do. Beyond that, there might be spells your players want, like, the ability to maybe just make specific objects invisible or something, or something spooky. But I think the main thing that you're going to want to be doing is finding out what your players want from custom spells, as it were. So if you're in the chat, hello, and if you have any requests for a spell for us to make, please do throw that in there. We've got our roll table up, so we can make something to do with damage types, and we can theme spells appropriately. But we might just start at looking at some basic kind of wizard spells and extrapolating from there. So let's get Beyond back up again. We will. Stream seems to be running a lot smoother tonight, which makes me happy. So I might just have to forego music in future. My source is the Player's Handbook. I said that and it immediately started lagging, so I cursed myself, never mind. Let's get back down to, we're going to go for wizard spells. And we're going to focus mainly on wizards today because I like the utility spellcasting class. You've got a lot of basic damage stuff here, but wizards also have a lot of like the cooler kind of like, Unseen Servant and silly things like Gaseous Form. You've got a lot. It's important to remember that you don't have to come up with a huge spell system like this if you're making your own game or your own world. Hello, Lime Otaku. Wonderful. We are, we're looking at spells, as I said. It's important to note that you don't have to come up with a huge, concise spell system like Dungeons and Dragons has, because a lot of these are carryovers from other editions, especially if it's got a name in front of it. It's named after an older The audio's kind of quiet. Okay, let me do something about that. Is that better? You enjoying that? We'll see. Yeah, so I'll move my microphone a little bit closer as well. Maybe give you a little bit more gain. Why not? Ooh, not quite to 11, but still. Right, so we have, like I said, a lot of options here already that are, just carryovers from other editions. So you don't have to feel the need to make that many spells. But like, you just look at something here, like Dream. Just the idea of a spell called Dream is nice to me. So let's have a quick look at that. You literally shape someone's dreams. I don't know what more you could want from a system of magic in a role-playing game. But yeah, cool, like out-of-the-box thinking things like that is more what you want to look for, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what system you're playing or what dice you're rolling, a firebolt is a firebolt. Like I said, yeah, if anyone in chat has any requests for a kind of spell to make, do throw them in. But I'm just going to start tinkering, I think, right now. I've been watching a lot of, I've been playing a lot of God of War, like the new one. Hey, how you doing? We've been playing a lot of God of War. With water would be cool. Yeah, water is underutilized. Okay, let's write that down then. Water. Water something. Cool. So yeah, as I was saying, I've been watching a lot of like Greek and Norse mythology stuff. And one thing that sticks with me about that kind of thing, especially if we're going to talk about creating our own magic system, which we won't do fully here today, but it would be nice to discuss. The one thing I've kind of like perceived from a lot of Greek legend and stuff like that, especially kind of like following kind of video game depictions of it, is that a major component in the kind of magic that gets done, or like the power dynamic that it gets done in those kind of worlds, is irony. And I really like the idea of a magic system that is powered by irony, and you can, like, similarly to I think Campaign Skyjacks does this really well, because in their world you can do anything with magic at all, and that what you want to do makes the difficulty of that go up or down. But I really like the idea of like, you can do whatever you want as long as it is extremely ironic, or a varying degree of ironic depending on what you want to do. And you look at other components to spells like okay, so if you want your spell to be fire, if there's going to be a cost to it or a component to it that has to be given up, what are two things that fire kind of does in exchange for, as well as destruction? Well, it's kind of like very visually loud, in terms of things like smoke, or just the sheer brightness of the flame, and it also consumes something when it does it. So then immediately you have two costs to doing something that's big and destructive. You have someone being alerted to it, and also the fact that something will be destroyed as part of it coming to life in the first place, whether or not you want that thing to be destroyed. So I like digging into the give and take of spells, because if we look at the components on Dream, for example, a handful of sand, a dab of ink, a writing quill plucked from a sleeping bird. That's really interesting and thematic, but it doesn't mean that you have to give anything up for this spell. But maybe if you wanted to make this a bit more interesting, you would have to audibly discuss one of your dreams, or the character would have to tell someone about their dream, and that could be like a great kind of narrative moment for it. But I think for now we'll maybe stick with the idea of water. Water's underutilized, definitely. Water. So okay. So let's look at spell. Let's search for spells then. And this is going to be, I think we'll use water as a basic kind of like, here's how you do this in D&D. So spells. Oh goodness. View all. There we go. So we're just going to search water in here to come up with some examples real quick. Control water, pretty basic. Create food and water. Shape water. Wall of water. Water breathing water. Walk and watery sphere. So the two kind of damage dealers that stick out there are Wall of Water, which is 3rd level. and watery sphere, which is 4th level. So the kind of damage that we're looking at here. So it doesn't seem to be a damage type associated with that. It's just restraining someone. So we could maybe allocate bludgeoning damage to it. Create a wall of water. Ringed wall. So that doesn't do damage. I think tsunami. Can I spell tsunami? There we go. Tsunami is a water-based one, I think, that does damage 8th level, so that's pretty mental. 300 feet long, 50 feet length. Savage your turns, the water appears. 60-10 bludgeoning. So water in this kind of like universe doesn't even have its own associated damage type, which is interesting because pretty much everything else has. You've got thunder and lightning damage. You've got two very distinct kind of aspects of the storm there that have different types of damage, but you don't have water damage, which, you know, if you own a house, you know is very real. I kid, of course. It's the year 2020. Nobody watching this owns a house. Okay. So, depending on the level. So let's say if we look at Firebolt, for example, we can get that from here real quick. If we're making a cantrip, so if we go as Firebolt as the basis for our cantrip, so let's say we're making a water cantrip. Now that's a simple 1d10 damage, and it travels, and there's some kind of like thematic way that it travels. I think the thing about Firebolt is that it goes further than most cantrips, just as like a symbolic version of propulsion. But yeah, that's 1d10, and it goes up with your levels. So, you know, if you're making a water-based cantrip, 1d10 is reasonable, a reasonable amount of damage to do. Assumably, if you're going along the line of other water-based spells, it's force damage. So we'll start writing these down. So 1d10 damage hang on, water something. So if we go cantrip, we got 1d10 damage. Let's start as we mean to go on. 1d10 damage. Should be bludgeoning damage. Not bulge damage, Christ. That's gonna be spelled wrong. Did I spell bludgeoning right? Oh my god. Bludgeoning damage. And I think if we're looking at water as a vector of travel, then we should be looking at other cantrips. So let's look at what else have we got? There's a frost. Chill touch is the other. Is it ray of frost? Ray of frost. So we've got ray of frost, which travels significantly less distance because it's cold, and cold is usually associated with, in D&D at least, losing movement. So what if we make this? What if we lead into the theming here then, and we've got this kind of like, we've got other spells in the D&D handbook that do a different amount of damage, not a different amount of damage, but at least water spells like Tsunami, they go a further distance, but do less as they go forward. So what if, rather than it being like a 60-foot range, it has a short and long range, like much like a ranged weapon. So long range, which, so let's say let's say it's 1d12 then. Now you say, oh, that's a lot for a cantrip, 1d12 damage. But, you know, a barbarian can use a great axe, so why can't a wizard use a 1d12 cantrip in my mind? No, other cantrips do 1d12. So how are we balancing this? We're going to balance it by giving it the short and long range. And I think we're going to make that like maybe the antithesis of what wizards are. So the short range, I think, should be, 20 feet. That's unheard of for a ranged cantrip, I think, and a long range of, I think, maybe 40 feet. Now, the question that I'm kind of bringing to myself there is, do we have it be like a disadvantage roll for it going long range, or do we have a lower damage dice for it going long range? So we could do something that goes even further. So we go short 20, 40, 60, and then we go 12, 10, 8. That's not bad, I think. So, okay. So rather than giving someone disadvantage on the roll like a ranged weapon, I think this might be a little bit more interesting. So we've got 20 foot does 1d12. We've got 40 foot does 1d10. I think we're going to make that do 1d8 rather than 1d10. Let's have a more drastic drop there, and then what do you think, chat? Do you think that 40 foot range should be less of a drastic drop? Because I feel like 1d10 is still fairly... No, but if a firebolt can go that far, so we'll do 1d10. And then 60 feet, we'll do 1d8. And now you've got something that is arguably maybe more powerful than firebolt, but at a cost of it being very short range. And then you see what you've done there. You've made something that is cool, but also its mechanics lock into its thematics, and that's what we're looking for with these spells. We're trying to make something that, even if just by example, goes hand in hand with the way other spells work. So all this kind of logically feeds back into the system of D&D. A cantrip about water doesn't exist, but we've made one, and it functions within, like I said, the set parameters of the world. So, like, you know, we've drawn logical distinctions there, and I think they work. What should we call this cantrip? I think it should be called... I think Wipeout. I like that. I really like that. Let's call it Wipeout. I don't know if there's a name that's better for it, but we can see. Cool. I think we could maybe keep going with water if we wanted to. We could do another water spell. So if you look at, like, we've got this utility at 3rd level here. Or rather, I know what we can do. We can look at some... This is what's good about D&D Beyond, is we can have some really cool filters. We can just get fire spells up. Whew. So let's get by level rather than name. Just loading them up a little bit. Cool. So we've got our fire, we've got create bonfire and things like that. A lot of elements. We've got all the fire damage stuff like Hellish Rebuke going up at 1st level. And you can see, like, comparatively the damage that they do. So we've got 2d10 fire damage for a 1st level spell slot. That makes perfect sense to me. So then it's also in line with Firebolt then, because that does 1d10, and this, so a 1st level spell slot only does 1 more than that. And that makes perfect sense. You've got slightly more utility stuff like Flame Blade and Heat Metal, which can be quite funny but grim. Fireball, which is an interesting example in that it is, by admission of the creators of D&D, broken. So doing 8d6 damage at 3rd level is a lot, but they left it in there because it being broken feels good, which I think is a really interesting way around spell creation. I always strive for balance, but sometimes it's nice to put something in the hands of the players that makes them feel like a hero, and I think sometimes making something unbalanced is the road to that. That's cool. That's cool indeed. Flame Arrows, good for warding, with 3rd level spells. But you can see how damage generally kind of ranks up as you go along. You got Wall of Fire, which does 5d8, which is interesting because that's less than Firebolt, which is a lower level. It also does other stuff. Flame Strike, 46 Fire and 46 Radiant. So that's 8d6 in total. Immolation, Firestorm, Prismatic Spray. And we've got all these crazy ones. Let's look at the 9th level. Let's look at the craziest. What damage is the craziest? 20d6 fire damage and 20d6, so 40d6 damage essentially, depending on how it's dished out, which is absolutely mental, as it should be at a 9th level. But let's say we made a 9th level water spell, so maybe we're looking at 20d6 bludgeoning damage and I don't know what else, what other kind of damage you do there. Maybe you just do 30d6 bludgeoning damage and you have the restrained condition for a certain amount of time, or you lose some movement. But you can see the logic in how he associates. Everybody does love some Fireball Freya. I think it's probably one of the most popular spells in D&D, and that's with good reason. But you know, that's I don't. For that very reason, I don't like making wizards that do fire, because it's so cliche. No, I like some fire spells. They're cool. But yeah, no. So we've kind of made a perfectly logical spell there, but we've made a damage spell. We've made a direct damage spell. We made it slightly interesting by giving it this kind of water effect, this wave, this like the further away it gets, the less powerful it is. And I don't think he didn't get any further away than that, otherwise he'd make things a little bit too complicated. But why don't we think about utility a little bit now? Utility is kind of the thing, the way I mentioned spells like Tensor's Floating Disc, which is, but you know, by today's standards, nope, I must have spelled Tensor wrong. We'll go back to wizard spells. We've got things like Tensor's Floating Disc, which are a set of spells brought over from previous editions, where gold was experience and you wanted to get more gold out of the dungeon. You'd use the pull cart that is essentially Tensor's Floating Disc. You've got Unseen Servant, which is also utility, which just creates a servant that does stuff for you. Invisible, mindless, shapeless force that performs simple tasks at your command until the spell ends. The servant springs into existence in occupied space. Basically, in each of your turns, as a bonus action, you can mentally command the servant to move up to 15 feet and interact with an object. And it lasts for an hour, and that's really cool kind of bit of utility, because, you know, something might be trapped. You put this unseen servant that can't really be hurt into it, and you set it off. And that's kind of where I kind of dig spells in D&D. That's the sphere I live in the things that I find interesting is not necessarily stuff that does damage, but something that does something interesting. You've got a lot of things like Hold Person, which aren't necessarily damaging, but have interesting effects in combat. There's things like, you know, there's lots of spells, but I'm having trouble thinking of something utility-wise that I need done in D&D that I don't have already in the Player's Handbook. We have, you know, with things like Xanathar's Guide, we got spells like Animate Objects, which is essentially the Wizard's Apprentice, like the Mickey Mouse thing where you've got the broomsticks cleaning up essentially, which I found really funny. And I've had one player used a great comic effect in animating a carriage and having it try and eat the rider. Yeah, alright then. Well, instead, rather than dwindling on something I can't think of at the moment, we can maybe discuss our ideas for other kind of magic-based systems. I think whatever dice system you're operating on, be that a D20 system, a roll over and under system, a you know, saving throws, or just a kind of not binary but very simple failure success, mixed success, apocalypse world mechanic. There's a lot of room in RPGs in general to play around with what the idea of magic is, because at the end of the day, magic is just an external and otherworldly force to manipulate the world around you. It is another tool in the player's toolkit for manipulating the world, like I said. So you've got, as one of the more prevalent examples I can think of, I follow a lot of campaigns Skyjacks by One Shot, James D'Amato and all those, where the magic used is, we don't have spells, you can just do whatever you want, we just rationalise how difficult that roll will be, and we use your Arcana skill to roll against that. And that's really interesting, and they also incorporate a tarot-like aspect to that. They have luminaries, which are featured at Illimat, which is also a very good game if you haven't played it. They can basically entreat like a tarot-like deck to improve the spell, possibly, but it might not do that, it might do something else. And I'm really open to that kind of interpretation in play space, which is why I like the idea of, like I said, this very Greek tragedy-esque irony-based magic system that I kind of have the idea to come up with. So this is where I wish I had a guest on, so I could kind of bounce off somebody. How would you then build a magic system from scratch? Well, it's largely dependent on the system that you're going for and building in again. You know what dice you have to roll to make things happen, so it has to align with whatever system of success you have in place. But I really dig the stuff, like the examples I've been giving, where it's more of a discussion with the player in the first place. So, and I think this is like another great feature of homebrewing spells for your players. There's literally no need to do that at all, unless they ask you for something. So it encourages you, if you're into homebrewing, like you could make magic items up with your players in mind that they haven't asked for necessarily, because that's an odd conversation to have, like, what magic item do you have? And do you want, rather? And then they get it, and then that's a little unsatisfying because it doesn't feel like it came out of the world organically. It felt like you gave it to them. But magic is such a direct and personal response to player agency that I feel like they need to be involved in like new spells that exist and things like that. You look at the example of Critical Role recently, and you've got Dunamancy and Graviturgy, which have just entered the 5th edition kind of pantheon. I mean, not all the spells from the show made it in, but that's an example of someone seeing a gap in the field of magic and wanting to fill it. But then you still have player interaction where, a lot of the new spells that are getting used are just things that the player, well, Liam O'Brien especially, wants for themselves, and to make their world a little bit more involvement from them with their tool of agency that is magic. I've been going on for far too long. Does anybody else have a request for a kind of spell, or a spell they wish they could have? We have a lot of... So Smite is... Alright, let's talk about Smite. I think that's probably a good segue. Smite is a paladin, a generally paladin focused spell. Oh no, I've got a fire tag on here. I need to redo that. Smite is a paladin focused set of spells. Big love to paladins out there, but they're all based on hitting things. Banishing, Blinding, Branding, Searing, Staggering, Thunderous, and Wrathful. They're all different, largely different kinds of... Oh no, there's 2 Branding Smites for some reason. Blinding, Branding. There's 2 are Radiant, but the rest of them are all kind of like fairly spread over the different kinds of damage spectrum. And some of them do interesting things, but there's the difference between doing something for utility and just buffing combat. There's also another interesting aspect. You've also got buffs. So you've got Bless that adds a d4 to rolls. Things like that. You have new spells like Gift of Alacrity that lets you add a d8 to your initiative, which was kind of something that maybe lacked in the system beforehand, and an interesting difference. There are plenty of class features that give you advantage on initiative, but there's not an awful lot that add a dice to it, which I think, though isn't that much of a distinction, is an interesting one to make, because there's no critting on initiative, so there's not that much point in re-rolling, but addition makes a lot more sense, because if you do roll a natural 20, that's not going to help you much on an advantage necessarily. Maybe it's by 3 or 4, but if you add numerical dice to it. Even if you roll a natural 20, you still get to add more to it. So I like that. It changes the top cap, essentially, is what I'm saying, for what you roll. But then there's another question then, isn't there? Does your system incorporate combat? Is combat important to your system? Is magic a means to, as I've said already, manipulate the world? Or is it a means to smash someone's face in? I mean, arguably that's also manipulating the world in some way. But I'm just realising how hard this is to do without music playing. I may play some for myself, and hopefully it won't stagger the stream. But I'm very conscious of the silence that's happening in my own world right now. Right, so we've got, like I said, smites. So that's whether or not you have combat. We've got buffs like bless, or what's the opposite of a buff? A debuff? I'm not sure. There's things like bane, which do the same as smite, but the opposite. It takes a d4 away from a enemy, or a player. But I don't know why you do that though. You've got healing spells. Is healing magic a thing? Does that need to be quantified? Is healing a number of points, or is it just a state of mind in your game? I think healing's pretty much got all of the spells it needs, really. Let's look at healing for a second. We're just gonna. This is the stream now. We're just looking at spells. This is the kind of low energy stream you've all become used to. Let's listen to. I will listen to some music. Okay, so we've got. Okay, and that's an interesting dichotomy that you've come up with there, J.R. Sison, in that you've got a version of Smite that is focused on zone control or crowd control, but that also involves hitting someone. At least in the system of D&D as it exists, hitting someone tends to undo things like that. But that is an interesting way to go. You see I've only got all spells. There we go. Let's do that again. So you've got a lot of, I think healing's pretty much well covered in 5th edition. You've got your basic, there's only one way to do healing. You have a dice amount to give to someone, and the more energy you pump into it, the more dice you roll. That's fair. It's hard to innovate, really. There's 1 or 2 spells that just give you 100 hit points, or 100 hit points to split, or things like that. I like John's idea of a different version of Smite. That is interesting. So if we're thinking about crowd control, we have stuff like that causes fear, and those things tend to be paladin class abilities. So, I'm trying to think of a way to punch a building and make it hallowed ground, essentially, because okay then, video game inspiration. How about something like a chain smite? So chaining smite. Let's get our smite spells back up. Let's get rid of that. So video game inspiration here. I'm thinking Dishonored. I'm really glad you said that, J.R. Sison. The most paladin sentence I've ever heard. I'm enjoying that. So chaining smite. Yeah, okay then. Let's definitely do that. I'm thinking of a smite off the top of my head that chains to multiple people. But that's not necessarily crowd control, so we'll come back to that later. I do like the idea of a Paladin of Helm. That's big stance on protection. Having said that, we do already have spells like that, is what I'm kind of getting at here. We've got things like Shield of Faith that you can cast on other people, and you've got Paladin auras and stuff. So I tell you what then, maybe let's remove this from the idea of a Paladin. And let's make this something for maybe other people. Why don't we play with this in the sense that like maybe it's not a smite, maybe it's like a punch of something, but like it's not necessarily god focused or So let's look at our smites again, because I'm struggling a little bit. We've got banishing, which makes people disappear for a little bit, I believe. Blinding, which is self-explanatory. Branding, which I think the target can't become invisible. You've got searing, which I believe is just fire damage that carries on. And it can jump, which is actually pretty good. So we've already kind of got a chain smite there a little bit. Staggering smite. We've got staggering, which is disadvantage ability checks is interesting. So you've got the ability to make one creature afraid by punching it. What if then? I'll tell you what then, let's just invert Wrathful Smite, because I feel like that makes a lot more sense. So, we'll call it Gruesome Smite. Or I felt that I think the crowd control element here is you hit an enemy and you don't do any more damage to them. You don't hurt them more. You just do a regular damage attack, but it incites fear in everyone within maybe 30 feet of that attack. I don't know if you've ever had a fight happen in front of you before, but I used to work at a nightclub. Now I've seen some punches that I could feel through the floor at like a good 20 feet away, which is a story for another time. But you hit an enemy doing no further damage than base. No damage can be added to this attack. No X. Attack other than base modifiers. Modifiers. Base modifiers, and then everyone within, I think 20 feet has to make a save for fear. Instead, the magic energy focused in this attack draws of others around it in a aggressive, I will say aggressive spectacle for now, because I'm not really sure how to work that. Every creature within, we'll say 20 feet for now. Of the target must make a whiz saving throw or be afraid of you. Which I think is pretty cool. I think we need to give this a higher spell slot then. So what spell level do we think they should be? We've got our smites here. Most of them are first level. We've got one that's 4th level. It gives a creature disadvantage, but that does a lot of extra damage. I think maybe 3rd level for this. Blinding Smite is a thing. There's 3d8. I think for potential advantage, this should be 3rd or 4th level. Because if those creatures are scared of you, then they can't come closer to you. And I think some... Do you have advantage on attacks against creatures who are frightened of you? I can't remember. But we're going to make it 3rd level for now, I think. Okay, so we've kind of like rationalised an effect for that in the D&D universe. Rather than saying like you do something gruesome, I just prefer the idea that like, oh, I felt that kind of like really like. So you don't immediately dispose of an enemy. I'm thinking that maybe if it's 3rd level, there's no extra damage. I think we're going to add a little bit of extra damage to make it worth the 3rd level. So an extra 1d8. Yeah, I think that's decent considering you could have a lot of targets afraid of you. What do we have on our 3rd level smite here? That's 2nd, 3rd, does 3d8. Maybe we'll do it 2. I'm just worried about making this too underpowered now for a 3rd level spell slot. Extra 2d8 damage. The magic energy, rather than take away a d8 and give it a better effect. How do we feel about that spell as a chat group? Let me know if you have any tweaks you'd like to make to that for 1 min, we'll say. Or until the end of the next turn? I'm not sure. 1 min, I'm gonna put brackets. I'm not sure. Let me know how you feel about that, chat. I think we made a pretty decent smite there with a bit of crowd control stuff. Gruesome. You like it? That's cool. What do we think? 1 minute or 1 turn? I think 1 minute's a lot in combat though. Or do they make a save at the end of every turn? We're going to put repeating save each turn. Because where's the fun in it otherwise? At the end of each of its turns. Cool. I'm quite happy with that. I like the idea of another... Let's do another smite because I had the idea for it now. So the idea of a smite that costs an action. So bonus. This is a bonus action. I like the idea of this being an action. So you really have to bank. Really have to bank on being able to do it your next turn. Yeah, I think that's a good. It could set them up as a wall, and I like that. I don't think there's enough kind of like. There's not enough focus on that in D&D tactically speaking. There's some, but it's not. It's very class or subclass specific, which can be a bit can hem you in just a little bit. I like the idea of like it's an action to cast this chaining smite. An action to cast. It chains multiple people, so I think elect up to 3 targets. within within 10 feet of each other. Within 10 feet of each other. Upon hitting one of the targets, so this is, sorry, I'm losing my concentration a little bit today. Upon hitting one of the targets, the other targets take their... Yeah, I think so. So do we think, yeah, so rather than, I think you've really hit on a good shout there, J.R. Syson. We'll write that in a second. But yeah, rather than doing extra damage. So upon hitting one of the targets, the others... take the base damage of the attack. I would say that you couldn't add smite to it, because then that's a surefire way to destroying an entire battlefield. I wouldn't know how to word that to say that they only take the base damage of the weapon. You can add smite to the first target, but it doesn't carry over. I'm going to put base damage to take the damage of the weapon plus strength. So if you have a weapon that does an extra 1d6 cold damage, that will carry over, but you can't add smite to it. Like regular smite to it. I don't know how to word that specifically, but I'm sure we could, given enough time. For each spell level of first, you can add another within add another target. I don't know how to reword that. Must be within 10 feet. You still have to hit as well. So like you could miss, and this could immediately. I mean, I would say that it's obviously it's concentration, so it still stays up. If you're unfamiliar with concentration, it's if you're casting smite, for example. I think we may have made two slightly overpowered smites there, but I do like them for their sheer flavour. Yeah, we've only managed to make 3 spells, but we did a bit of discussing spell systems in general. I think that might be material for a podcast more than it is necessarily a live stream. But I like what we did today. Thank you very much, J.R. Syson and Frey, for your contributions there. It made a lot of sense. I really do need to start doing a lot more work before these to make it a bit more smooth, but it's been a bit of a busy week this week. But I like what we came up with. I think we're going to end it there today, only after an hour, because as last week I'm struggling with energy a little bit, but I enjoyed doing it. I think I might actually write these spells up and put them in my homebrew. I really do like the gruesome smite. I think it needs a different name than gruesome, but I can think of that another time. Yeah, I like chaining. I like the idea of it doing the damage of your weapon rather than being able to chain holy energy through it. Maybe it goes from a different aspect than that. But I can imagine like maybe a fighter picking that up. It's very Dishonored, and I like the idea of training multiple targets. But yeah, we're going to leave it there. Like I said, thank you very much for watching. Thanks for contributing, guys. Stay safe out there. Black Lives Matter. Trans rights are human rights, we'll say again. There's lots of charities you can donate to. I neglected to put those up at the start, but they're quite easy to Google and find. Yeah, thanks again.